Rev it up and welcome to Cars Yeah, show number 2466. Today we're going to have some fun, so be prepared to be inspired.
This is Cars Yeah, where you'll enjoy interviews with inspiring automotive enthusiasts. Mark Green is here to provide you with a fuel injection of automotive inspiration. So get in, sit down, buckle up, and get ready for a wild ride here on Cars Yeah.
Hello, inspiring automotive enthusiasts, and welcome to Cars Yeah. Today I'm in Maryville, Tennessee, where it's a little chilly. It's a little chilly in a lot of places across the country right now, but I always say, hey, it's winter. That's what it does in winter. With a very special guest by the name of Sam Smith. Sam, welcome to Cars Yeah. Do you have any gear? And are you ready to release the clutch?
Why not? Let's go.
Let's go. So before I give you a more proper introduction, I always break the ice with this. What's one little thing that most people don't know about Sam Smith?
Man, well, I have a debilitating sickness for vintage typewriters. I own 2 of them, but if I had the space and could afford it, I'd probably have 150 of them. My wife has told me that I'm not allowed to buy any more typewriters until we, I don't know, own a private island or end up with a jet or something.
So typewriters, very interesting. I know when we'll learn more about this, you come from the world of media. Why typewriters? What's so intriguing about that typewriter?
Well, I got into car media because, obvious answer, I love cars, right? But I grew up around a restoration shop. My dad ran a restoration shop that dealt with British sports cars and old German stuff. And I've always loved mechanical things. And when you're a writer who loves mechanical things, you just kind of end up at the intersection of hunty-pecky machines that make a lot of noise and are loud and completely obsolete. So just something charming about them.
Yeah, I took typing in junior high and high school. And everybody said, why are you taking typing? Only secretaries need to know how to type. Now, I won't say that I had this forward vision of what was to come, that we would all be sitting in front of keyboards 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. But I'll tell you, I'm glad that I did. I took them because that's where all the girls were. So, I'm like, oh, this room's full of nothing but my friend Mike and I. Yeah, we took all the typing classes and we competed how fast we could go. But I remember when they got Selectrics. Remember those with the little balls in the class? Oh my gosh, we thought we died instead of the click, 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 Well,
it's so funny, right? Because I grew up typing on keyboards and writing on keyboards and learning how to write on a keyboard where you think and as fast as you can type, it's out. And it's so, I think if I had started out on typewriters, bang, 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 boom, 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 I probably would have walked off a cliff. I mean, and then it's on the page, and once it's there, you can't undo it without a lot of work. It's a totally different experience. It's like turning your brain off.
We've come a long way, baby. But I'll tell you this: I have a cousin who is into collecting old radios from the 30s and 40s, the Bakelite radios.
Yeah,
and that can get out of hand. I think at one point he had 500 of those things. His whole house, the walls were just shelves filled with radios. It would look like a museum. Yeah, it finally got to the point where he had to just say, I have to stop. This is insane. Yeah,
whatever you do it 10 out of 10, full throttle, right?
Yeah, exactly. So let me introduce you properly here. Sam Smith is a writer and a former executive editor of Road and Track magazine. He's been an automotive journalist for over 20 years, typing away. He has contributed to a variety of publications, including the New York Times, Esquire, and Car and Driver. And as TV and video presenter, Sam's talents have been tapped by clients as diverse as NBC Sports and classic car insurance provider Hagerty. His career highlights include track testing Fernando Alonso's Formula One McLaren. What? Oh my gosh, that sounds like fun. Flying to Japan for a deep dive into the land's offbeat Dajiban. Am I saying that right?
Dajiban. Imagine a Japanese person who loves vans saying the word Dajiban.
Dajiban. Okay, I should know that. I was made in Japan, but that's another story. Culture and driving to the Arctic Circle in a Jeep with no doors because, well, that sounded like fun. Along with his co-host, motorsports legend Ross Bentley and Jeff Braun, who, by the way, are both past guests here on Cars Yeah. Sam and these guys have just launched a podcast called It Not the Car. Can't wait to hear about that. We'll be back in just a moment, but first a word from our sponsors, so give them a little love. Buckle up. We're going for a fun ride. We'll be right back. Are you ready to take charge of your financial future? Then let me introduce you to Capitalize Your Finances. It's an online course designed to empower you with the knowledge and tools for mastering your money. This course will help you lay out the ins and outs of budgeting, the importance of emergency funds, investing strategies, and how to plan for a secure retirement. All this presented by financial planner Chris Paniotu. Chris has developed this course to help you effectively navigate your world of finance with confidence. Stop stressing about money and start taking control. Enroll in Capitalize Your Finance online course today and pave your way to financial success. To learn more, go to capitalizepodcast.com/courses, or better yet, go to the Cars Yeah website, show notes page for today's show, and click on the link under Capitalize Your Finances. You'll be glad you did. Do it today. For several years now, you've heard me talk about Linkage Magazine. I've been a subscriber since the start. Their talented and creative team brings you a spectacular publication and website that shares the automotive passion from a worldwide perspective. Linkage is about driving, restoring, collecting, and firsthand experience at collector car auctions and more. They bring you real-world values plus rational, experienced opinions on the current markets. They cover the automotive world and the people who share our passions. And Linkage Magazine has grown, mailing you 6 issues annually. Join me on this journey with Linkage. They're geared for the automotive life. You can subscribe at linkagemag.com. Hey, guess what? Some of you regular listeners will remember back in 2019, I created 10, 11 shows called Cars Yeah TV, where I went to some fabulous locations of past Cars Yeah guests, and we did a TV show about it. Well, they're up on the Cars Yeah YouTube channel. So go check it out at YouTube. Just type in Cars Yeah, and the shows will be there for you to enjoy. I hope you have fun watching. All right. So obviously, Sam, a history in media, typing on keyboards, collecting a few typewriters, and listen to your wife. It'll get out of hand. So don't go there. I want to talk about what you guys are doing today. But before we get into this new podcast, a little bit more about you. I alluded to some very unique things that you've done in the past in the car world, from driving an F1 car, hats off to you for that, to going to the snowy wilderness with no doors on a Jeep. This fascination for cars and passion for doing crazy things and writing about them, where did this all come from?
Like I said, I grew up around a restoration shop, and my dad and mom had a house full of books. And in the end, my hands were either greasy out in the garage with dad, or I was inside getting greasy, dirty hands on books I wasn't supposed to get grease on, right? And it kind of came together just because I love stories. I love the past, and I love how when we look at the past, we tend to pull things out of it that we don't always pull out of the everyday. So much of journalism is trying to figure out how we're going to look at things that are happening now, 20 years on. And I just fell in love with the idea of combining things I love, machines, cars, speed, performance driving, club racing, all of that stuff, with the idea of trying to figure out what it is about cars and transportation, speed, all of that matter to us. I love the fact that, people who don't like it tend to pull it down to you're an adrenaline junkie, or, you just like loud V8s. It's never that simple. It's never, people are complex. It's always something more interesting than that,
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like a lot of your past career has been going out and doing fun adventures. That's one of the great things about being in this world, is we get invited to events. Sometimes people toss us keys and say, take it for a drive. This drive you took in an F1 car, I've got to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I was like I said, for about 8 years. I was executive editor and then editor at large at Road and Track. And I had written, I'd written for a number of magazines before, worked for a number of different car magazines. And the interesting thing about Road and Track was that everything there was predicated on going and doing and the stuff that makes us love driving. And so the job there was essentially sit down and dream up a way to pull back the curtain or find something that needs explaining or go answer questions. And that turned into everything from, like you said, one year I drove a Jeep Wrangler with no doors to the Arctic Circle because it seemed like a really dumb idea and a good way to talk about how and why we do the things we do, to, for a while I was kind of the magazine's chief track driver, chief track test driver for all manner of performance cars, exotics, race cars, all the way back to the 20s. I drove 1920s Alfa Grand Prix cars. I drove Le Mans winning Porsche prototypes, and you get to meet people and know people, and conversations start. And one of the guys we got to know was a very kind gentleman from Columbus, Ohio, and we talked for about a year, and he owned an ex-Fernando Alonso McLaren from, I believe it was the 2007 season. It was a car he won the Monaco Grand Prix with. And after an awful lot of paperwork and an awful lot of insurance and an awful lot of me kind of going, ooh, and taking a deep breath, I got a handful of laps in a car that is one of the most spaceship-like things I've ever touched. It was the weirdest, most surreal thing. But again, it turned into a great story, and it was, that was the definition of the job. You never get rich doing it, but you get to have experiences that you almost can't buy and share them. So it was pretty great.
Absolutely. Well, this evolution of the car world has gone through a major transition as of late. And before we get into your podcast, I'd have to ask you what your opinions are of what we're going through right now, specifically with the EV world. And we're starting to see cracks in all of that happening pretty fast. All of a sudden, go figure, but we can talk about all those reasons too. But what's your opinion of where we are now in the EV world? And I know none of us have a crystal ball, so I won't put you under that kind of pressure. But it used to be, I read Road and Track for years. I mean, all the car magazines, I used to subscribe to like 40 car magazines. And my wife would always go, that stack's getting bigger over there next to the bed. And that's changed too, obviously, as you know, as media's changed and so forth. But it was always 0 to 60, 0 to 60, 0 to 60. And the biggest thing I've seen with EVs is that has obliterated that. It doesn't mean anything anymore for most cars. It's like, well, yawn, because I can get in my rental Tesla and blow your Porsche GT3 right off the street. So I'd love to hear your impressions of where we're at now and maybe a little glimpse into where you see the future going with EVs.
Well, it's an interesting intersection, right? Oh, Lord, I made that pun. I should never make that pun. Unintentional puns.
That's okay.
It's an interesting intersection we're driving toward, Mark.
There you go. But buckle up for the ride.
But no, we're at an inflection point because, for so long we've known this shift was coming. We didn't know how it would come. Most people, frankly, for a long time, most people in the media, most people in the industry assumed it was further off than it was. Tesla changed that roughly a decade ago, but we're now at the point where, we're asking really hard questions and coming up against, figurative rev limiters in terms of battery infrastructure, charging infrastructure, where the batteries come from and what we do with them both before and after they have a life cycle in the public, and how all of that stuff works. That's an extremely complex problem. We forget that it took 3, really 4 decades and a couple of major economic events, the Great Depression, World War II, to really install an automotive infrastructure in the United States. And that was a different time. Most of the country wasn't paved, but there was still a point where there wasn't a gas station on every corner, and that took time. And that was a simple problem to solve, relatively speaking, compared to what we're dealing with now. As far as the speed and the metrics things, the fact that 0 to 60 used to be everything, and then we kind of reached the limit of it with modern tires. It's funny because some of the Teslas will do numbers that Bugattis only did 20 years ago.
I know, it's amazing.
$1 million for. And those are the big secret of speed is that, that stuff gets old. One of the remarkable things about, you talk about car magazines, one of the remarkable things about working at car magazines is that you get to drive literally everything. Road and Track it's just like Car and Driver and Motor Trend. There's a big board in the back of the office with all of the cars, the test cars that are in that week, and you take a different car home every night all year long. And very quickly, you realize that, speed isn't useful or interesting unless it makes you feel something. You get very used to 2.9 seconds to 60 or 700 horsepower or whatever it is after a couple of, thwacks at the throttle. It's why, people buy turbocharged Nissan GTRs that make 1,000 horsepower and then go back to their tuner 2 weeks later and go, can it make 1,500? Is that a thing you can do? I want more.
Yeah.
And I think to answer your question, I think we're gravitating toward an actual good place with it. We're moving in the direction where people who love driving for what it gives back but it makes you feel and think and how you're engaged. Car manufacturers are slowly starting to recognize that numbers aren't it. The experience is what matters. And you see it in everything from the fact that a Tesla Model 3 has better steering than the average BMW 3 Series to, the fact that people still buy manual transmission Porsches all day long, even though the automatic is faster. The twin clutch is faster by a long shot, stuff that a lot of people didn't predict. But it's an interesting time in so many ways.
Well, you touched on, I think, the main thing coming from a strong marketing background. It's how you feel.
Yeah.
And for car people and even non-car people, if a vehicle makes them feel good, I'll give you an example. My nephew works for Tesla now, worked for Volkswagen for 11 years. And he said, Volkswagen, when people would come in to get their cars fixed, they were pissed. He said, when Tesla people call me, and that's how he fixes cars now from his bedroom on the phone, to get their cars fixed, they apologize for bothering me. Now, we could talk about Tesla and what they built in this cult bait, kind of thing, and many brands have done it. But the bottom line is he bought his wife a Tesla, and he said she is not into cars at all. She's an EMT, emergency room nurse, and a paramedic. Cars only are a way to get somewhere. She said she's like a 16-year-old, giggling at her first drive. Every day she drives her car. So therein the magic of that vehicle has touched a nerve in her, a non-car person. For you and me, it's easy. It's, the look back. If you don't look back at your car when you park it and walk away, then it doesn't mean anything to you. So yeah, it is interesting time. Nicely put. I think so. And eventually we'll work through all this, no doubt, but it's going to take longer than probably the government thinks we can all do it. And if they could get out of our way, we might be able to get it done, right? So that's another question. So let's talk about It's Not the Car. Interesting title for this new podcast that you and Ross and Jeff have done. And for those listeners that missed my talks with Ross and Jeff, you can go back and find those on the Cars Yeah website. Ross, of course, known as the driving coach, and he has a great weekly blog he puts out about driving, which I subscribe to, which is fascinating because I used to be a race car driver. So I said, where were you back then? Because I was right here. You just needed to read my books more. And he lives right up the road from me. So that's kind of cool. So why did you get involved with these guys? Tell us all about It's Not the Car and what this new, and it's a vlog because it's visual, right? Versus what I do, all audio. Am I using the right terminology?
Sort of. I mean, it's just a podcast. There's a video element to it released on YouTube, but it's available anywhere you get your podcasts, right? Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, all down the line. But Ross and Jeff, and I actually met Jeff through Ross. Jeff is one of the world's great motorsport engineers. He's won literally anything that is worth winning in sports cars in America, and is just a wonderful, great, thoughtful guy. And the one thing he has in common with Ross is that both of them, they've built a career out of asking questions, trying to figure out why conventional wisdom doesn't always apply, and then what you do moving forward from that. And I've known Ross for years. We actually was responsible for helping get him involved in Road and Track. He wrote a column about driving there while I was there for a bit, and we worked together. We did several different track tests, had a great time. And I got to know him a little better. And I'd read his books when I was younger, because the Speed Secrets books are, the great secret about what Ross does is that it's geared toward helping you become a better driver. But his methods really apply to anything, toward being a better thinker, toward being a better writer, toward being a better, the human person who goes into a job and relates to people. Because it's all about how do we grow and how we think and change and how you can work on that yourself. And it sounds touchy-feely, but in the end, it's just, how do humans get better? And so Ross and I started having these conversations. We were friends and got to talking about all this sort of stuff and how it relates to motorsport, but also the rest of life. And then after a while, kind of roped in Jeff, and we, in the end, decided that it made more sense to put something down on tape. And that turned into eventually a podcast focused on racing. But it's focused on racing in the same way that, Drive to Survive, the Netflix Formula One drama, is, in the sense that it's not the cars that make it, right? You don't watch Formula One for the cars. You watch for what happens, how the people think and work. The great things about Drive to Survive was that it pointed out that there are humans in those cars.
You're right.
Sometimes they make really dumb decisions, and sometimes they make great ones.
And humans behind the pit wall, too. There's this massive group of people with all these personalities.
To make a very long story short, the whole idea was that the three of us are mostly just fascinated with the choices people make under extreme pressure. And Drive to Survive shows that, right? Everybody in racing at every minute has something on the line, something to lose, some gain, not just a win, but careers and risk and life. And these guys have been everywhere and done everything. And the podcast is named that way. It's called It's Not the Car, simply because in the end, car isn't what makes it interesting. Car is why we show up, and the people are why we stay.
Well, something I've learned after interviewing so many people, that all these cars are really just catalysts that bring everybody together.
Oh, totally.
We see it at races, concours events, cars and coffees, and it's a bond in this car world. Those of us, and we all listening know this, but people that aren't car people, when they get into the R world, they go, wow, you guys are all like really nice and friendly, and you're so passionate. And, I can call somebody who's been on my show and they're in a board meeting and they'll leave the room to talk to me because I'm going to talk about cars, not about numbers, or how many people we have to lay off today, or who do we have to hire, any of that kind of stuff that's, not much fun. So I think it's really cool what you guys are doing. And is it a weekly show, monthly show? How often do we get to enjoy this?
It's a weekly show. New episodes air every Tuesday in the morning. They're live at the beginning of the day. And thank you. That's really kind of you. Ultimately, we're not doing it we're never going to get rich doing it. It's mostly just because we love talking about this stuff. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Well, absolutely. I'm excited. I've always said when I got into this, I reached out to a lot of people that I thought knew what they were doing. Very few of them are willing to talk to me, except for the people in the car world. So I realized, okay, there's something in common here. We want to help each other. And I try to do the same when people ask me things. I always like to, and a lot of this can relate back to what you're doing now, if you'd like, however way you want to handle it or drive it, go down the road. There's a few more. So good at these things, aren't they? So easy. Is what I call driving inspirations. There's another one. Mentors, influencers. Has there been somebody like that in your life that's really stood out and really helped guide you down a path that turned out to be really positive for you?
Yeah, actually, two people. One of them, I believe, has actually been a Cars Yeah guest. It's a gentleman named Satch Carlson.
Satch, yeah, BMW.
yeah. He used to be for a long time. He was an Auto Week writer, but he now runs the BMW Car Club America's Roundel magazine. Mm-hmm. And Roundel, I got attracted to old, cheap, broken BMWs because all old, cheap BMWs are broken.
Hey, be careful! I'm a BMW guy.
Believe me, I am too. I have several very ugly ones on the property. But yeah, I got attracted to that stuff kind of in high school and college because they were great driving cars that if you're willing to put a little, blood and sweat into, you could afford to keep running, and got involved with the club. And Satch was just one of the first people who let me write for him. And he was so patient and thoughtful. And, him and, the first car magazine I worked at it's defunct now. It was called Automobile. Came out of a couple of people who left Car and Driver.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. And the woman who ran it was a legend in the business, still is, named Jean Jennings. And both of them were as different as chalk and cheese, but they did the same thing. And that Satch and Jean both listened as I was frankly bad at my job, as I wrote and told stories terribly. I was obnoxious and young and stupid in 1,000 ways, and they were patient when they didn't have to be. And they just kept giving feedback when I asked for it. And I kept asking, how do I get better? And they just kept listening. It was remarkable.
Well, Satch I've known forever, and he actually used to live in La Jolla where I grew up. Now he lives on a rock in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean somewhere. Yeah, that move was like, what are you doing? Your Z8's not going to go very fast on that island. But he's been great. Followed him for many years. What a character. I mean, big time character. And Jean, I've known of her forever. I have tried to get her on the show. I just can't convince her that this is what she should do. So maybe someday, Jean, come on, give me a little love, huh?
She's amazing. I hope she does. She's wonderful. Well, she's one of the best people.
Maybe you can twist her arm for me a little bit. Maybe I just need to find the right person. It only took me 9 years to get Jay Leno on the show. So sometimes the greats take a little bit longer than the average folks like me. I like to also ask about challenges. And the reason I ask this question is, have you shared a big challenge, but more importantly, what did it teach you? Because if we're not failing, we're not trying, is what I used to tell my kids. They come home upset that they missed five equations on the math test. And I say, well, that's good. Now you know what you need to learn. Give them a different perspective. Just like bad kid, you get no allowance this week, which is kind of the way the school system operates. They emphasize what you don't know versus what you do. Let's emphasize what you can learn. So what's a great challenge in your life?
Man, that's a tough one. Nobody has an easy life. Doesn't matter what it looks like from the outside. And thinking about that, everybody has a laundry list of things they've had to struggle with and deal with. But honestly, the one thing that I'd point to is for me, it's been working in an industry that I love, media, covering a subject that I love, where there's, not a lot of stability. There's not a lot of money going around, and things are constantly kind of changing and shrinking. It can be really, really difficult to wake up every day and keep going sometimes when salaries are getting cut and your friends are getting laid off, and, quality seems less and less important to so many people. But ultimately, I think that's what's always kept me going is the notion that kind of stuff people have been talking about that since the dawn of the printing press, right? Forever. I think the hardest thing in all of it has been trying to stay positive when everyone else says you shouldn't. In the end, it's the one thing that I think makes such a difference is just reminding yourself that what anybody else thinks doesn't matter. It's your blood pressure, and if you love it and you can make a go at it, keep going. When it gets sticky, just keep poking things with a stick.
Would you say, this is something near and dear to my heart too, because I've seen that industry go through all these gyrations, and specifically when the computers came about and the internet and people's dynamics of how they digest things and so forth. Would you say that a part of this for people that want to be in this world of media is you have to be willing to change with the times? Because some of the things that I saw happening, and I'll use an example. I worked in the advertising world for 11 years and even did in my time later on. But the hot press in printing, the little, lead press, that. Yeah. And then when this thing called the Mac SE came along, desktop publishing, and everybody started doing that. I remember a printer we worked with, all the hot press lead setters went on strike. And they marched in front of the building because we don't like these computers. We like playing with hot lead. Anybody that's as old as me will know what I'm talking about. Yeah, they actually used to have little boxes with little E's in them. That was the biggest box. Yeah. And for a year, they walked outside. I used to go to that company to print things down to San Diego. And every time I drive by, they'd yell at me when I'd walk in the door. And I'm like, you guys just need to learn how to use a computer. I mean, that's all it takes. That's what we did. Our advertising firm, we bought a little thing called a Mac SE and thought it was God's gift to the advertising and design world. But you have to change. Would you agree that in the media world, that is absolutely imperative? Because as you've said, magazines came and went, they fired, they hired. You never knew from the next day. Guess what, folks? Somebody bought us. The boss is out of here and all of you are fired. Have a great life. See you. Bye. Like, well, yesterday you were my friend. What happened? I mean, it's imperative, right? And it's not just, I don't think it's tied to any one business or anything else. It's such a part of life. And the older, and I'm not that old. I don't feel that old. I'm in my early 40s. I'm 42 years old. You're just a puppy.
43.
You're just a puppy.
but
enjoy it.
Thanks. My back hurts in the morning. I'm trying to enjoy that. But the idea that, the older you get, the more you realize that nothing stays the same. And if you try and resist that change, you don't end up stopping it. You never stop it. All you end up is falling off the train, watching it leave you in the distance, and then you wake up one day and everything's different, and you don't even know where to start to get back on because the train's in the distance, right? You can't run fast enough to keep up. There's an old quote I love from one of my heroes, an old sports car racer and sports writer named Denise McCluggage. She had brief moments in Formula One and in sports cars, and helped actually found Auto Week magazine. Yep. But she has this quote that goes something like, and forgive me if I'm not remembering it verbatim, but it's, change is the only constant, hanging on is the only sin. Just the idea at the core of that is, I just love learning. I love, as much as I love the past and stories and history and how that makes us who we are, and as much of my work has been about that, I love figuring out what's next, looking at what's next. Mm-hmm. And you can't do that if whatever comes along, you look at it and go, eyebrow raise, tick-tock, that's going to kill us all. Well, it's like, well, okay. Nothing's ever entirely good or bad. It's all about, for me at least, I think it's about trying to find the positive in whatever the next step is, because so much of it is, it's not obvious from the surface. The deeper you dig, deeper you get.
Absolutely. I was so fortunate to have Denise as a guest about 2 months before
Really?
we lost her. Oh yeah, go back.
Oh,
You
man.
can find her in my archives if you just go to Cars,
will.
yeah, and do a search, type her name in there, or there's a page called Resources, and you can see I've interviewed over 450 women now in the motorsport industry.
well.
And very lucky to get her. I met her on the lawn at Pebble Beach. I got to sit next to her up in the judges box during Pebble Beach when the cars rolled over, and she was on my right, and Sir Jackie Stewart, sorry, Jackie, was on my left, and I'm like, how did I get here? And who do I talk to? And what do I say? And how do I not look like a fool? And unfortunately, I could never get Jackie on the show. I tried and tried, but Denise was gracious enough. And she actually was a challenge. And I'll say something about her. I finally convinced, I didn't know she was ill and was dying. I didn't know that. She didn't share that. I finally convinced her to be on the show. And she said, Mark, you're the most politely persistent man I've ever met in my life. I said, well, thank you, I think, And she said, okay, I'll do it. And we had a good time. I'll tell you, though, there was one question, and she's the only person out of 2,466 that would not answer one of my questions. I'll tell you which one it is later because I'm going to be asking you that question. I don't want you to use her as an excuse. Let's talk about a special vehicle in your life. One special vehicle, and share a story about that ride.
Oh man, there are so many. I had owned something like 42 or 43 terrible cars by the time I was 34, 35.
Wow, impressive.
I mean, when you say that number, we're talking about some of them were awful things that your mother would kick you out of the house if she saw you hang out with. But if I had to pick one, it's probably during the pandemic, I accidentally on purpose bought a terrible old early 1970s BMW 2002 TII. Bought it sight unseen. I've had a bunch of 2002s. I used to club race them. I kind of came up in them, and that's how it was my entry into BMWs. For people that don't know, they're basically just a little box sports sedan. Yeah, in the 70s. It was one of the first kind of fully resolved sports sedans. Comfortable thing that went fast and handled well and stopped and was built pretty well. And this one had lived through what we now know is probably a couple of floods. It came out of Baltimore, hadn't run in about 10 years. It was terminally rusty. A friend of mine convinced me to buy it sight unseen, and we went to pick it up, and he looked at me, and this is a guy who works on these things for a living. He's a professional mechanic. He looked at me, he was like, I'm sorry.
Sorry. Yeah.
It was worse than I thought. And I
should have given you that drug.
I drove it down the street to put it on. I had a rented trailer in the truck, and I drove it down the street, put it on the truck, and I could hear this creaking, and it was the rear subframe was coming loose from the car.
Yeah.
It was not attached in about 4 different places.
Wow.
The whole floors had holes, and the whole car was just Swiss cheese, like the kind of thing you would throw away. And after a while, I thought, well, hell, I have this thing. It was cheap. Basically just, tiny cash. I should probably part it out. And then after a while, after a day or two of thinking about that in the shower, I decided, no, I don't want this to die. And that's really dumb because if I had gone through and restored it the right way, and it would have cost $80,000, maybe $100,000. I don't have that kind of money, especially not for a terrible old 2002. And called up a fabricator friend of mine, a couple other friends of mine, and we ended up, I basically just said, how do we get this thing living and safe with the least amount of effort in the dumbest way possible? And that turned out to be welding a bunch of steel tubes into it and kind of making an exoskeleton for the thing so it hung together. And that was just kind of one of those weird pandemic projects that we threw together over a couple of months. I wrote about the whole thing. I was working for Hagerty, the insurance company at the time, and wrapped it up. And when I wrapped it up, it was so ugly that I pulled it up at gas stations, and people would be like, oh, that's nice. What's your plans for it? Are you going to restore it? And I could grin and say, man, I already have. And then about a few months after that, I drove it 5,000 miles to California and back in the middle of an heat wave to enter it into a fancy car show, Pebble Beach weekend, as a joke. And it made me very happy.
Was that Lemons?
No, it was Legends of the Autobahn.
Oh, they let you in? Really? Wow.
One woman walked by and she obviously didn't know I was the man who owned that terrible thing. And she looked at it and looked at her husband or boyfriend and whoever was with her and said, why is it here? Does it even run? It's so ugly. Yeah. And I elbowed a friend of mine in the ribs. I'm like, we're coming up in the world.
What year was that?
The Legends?
Yeah, that you had the car in Legends.
That would have been, okay, so I think that was summer of 21, maybe?
21, okay.
I think it was 21, yeah.
I think I saw that car. I'll have to go back to my pictures. I probably said the same thing.
You should get a tetanus shot if you're anywhere near it.
Two of them.
Sorry.
No, that's a fun story, though. Well, it just shows you can do anything in the car world at any level. You don't have to have fortunes, but it also is a good lesson that, yes, maybe it's sometimes best to find a car that someone else wasted a lot of money on and buy that after it's restored. So there you go. So I'm going to crawl on your head. I'm a car psychologist here. I hold a special degree created by me in Adobe Illustrator, I think it was, or InDesign or something like that. If you were a vehicle, if you were manifest, reincarnated, not what you want to be though. This is how you perceive the man in the mirror. You got to dig deep for me here, Sam. What would you be and why?
What would I be and why?
Yeah.
I'm going to go, does it have to be, can we be existential? Can I
you can go anywhere you want
here?
with this because you're on the psychiatrist couch. So all you need is a box of tissues.
Well, it starts with my mother and 20 years ago. No, so I'm going to go, let's just riff on this off the top of my head. So I would go with a 65 Mustang notchback with the trunk open and a Honda Cub motorcycle in the trunk. And the Cub is missing one wheel and the whole package is, it might be flying off a cliff and about to hit ground, but hasn't hit ground yet. How about that?
Now that's a unique answer, which begs the question, why?
I don't know. Because I'm one of those people that, there are Mustang people, there are Porsche people, there are, Camaro people. I'm an everything person. And sometimes the focus is hard to maintain. And sometimes, life just feels like you're trying to, it's like that scene in Steve Martin's The Jerk where he's like, all I need is this lamp and this chair. And he's got his bathrobe and he's walking down the street carrying like 40 pieces of furniture. Yep. Sometimes you feel like that's you with everything you love. And you're in the process of falling off a cliff and you don't know what's at the bottom. And, eventually you'll hit ground and when you're 80 or 90, if you're lucky, but you don't know what's there. And it's like, well, falling, enjoy the ride, I guess. I don't know.
So now I understand that movie. I never could figure it out. Thanks for helping me with that.
I'm in the phone book. I'm in the phone.
Yeah, very good. Well, I'll release a secret now. That is the question Denise would not answer.
Really?
I could not get, it was funny. She finally said, Mark, I'm not going to answer that question because I wouldn't be a car.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, so I took that part out of the show, but I was kind of disappointed. Yeah.
What an amazing lady she was, man. She was. I'm so envious.
Very, very fortunate that I got to meet her that way. So, great books. We love great books. I assume being a journalist, a writer, you're a reader. Is there a great book you could share with us?
Can I give you two?
Of course.
First, I'd go with, I forget when this came out. It might have come out in the 30s, 40s, 50s. Oh, wow. It's Charles Lindbergh's The Spirit of St. Louis, which is, as you might expect, it's the story of how he flew across the Atlantic Ocean alone from raising the money. And it starts in the beginning, raising the money from true believers, pitching everybody and hearing no 1,000 times, to building the airplane, to all the way down to not falling asleep as he closed in on Ireland and France. And it's, say what you will about Lindbergh himself. He was a complex guy and had some sympathies in World War II that probably weren't always in the right direction. But ultimately, he was an incredibly brave, driven, thoughtful man on so many levels. And it turns out was a hell of a writer. And the book is, it's not medium thickness, but it's relatively easy to read. And it's one person talking about why so much of this intangible thing matters to him. Wow. And he ends up in all these places making all of these decisions that are the kind of decisions that you and I might agonize over. And he's just like, yep, go, that. Yeah. And in the end, later, he's like, well, that wasn't a good idea. And it all goes wrong. But it's that's the first one. It's one of the all-time great adventure stories. The second one is a thing that I've recommended to about 1,000 people over the years. It's used to be a writer for flying and occasionally car and driver, but mostly flying. A guy named Gordon Baxter, who was a radio host from Texas. He was a private pilot, but he wrote a column for flying called Back's Seat, a pun on his name, that was on the last page. And it was basically just him waxing romantic about flying and about how it hits normal people, right? Because most of the people who buy Cessnas and, go down to your local airport, they're not Chuck Yeager. They're not breaking the sound barrier. They're just doing something that fulfills them. Mm-hmm. And he wrote about that. And he wrote about the people that make up those communities and how that all ties together. And the book is collection of columns with, kind of reminiscing interspersed between it. And it is one of the most artfully, quietly romantic things I've ever read. And it's delicate and engaging. And like I said, I've recommended it to about 1 billion people over the years. But it's magical stuff, even if you're not a pilot, just about how we love things and want.
Well, thanks for bringing 2 new books. The columns, but we'll call it a book. Yeah, that nobody has mentioned here, which is pretty amazing because I've got a place on the website called Guest Recommended Books with over 3,000 books listed there with quick, easy clicks to buy.
Wow.
So, yeah. So we'll add a few more to the list. Very cool. I see a flying trend here. You want to be a pilot?
My dad was a flight instructor when I was younger and a corporate pilot for a bit. He got out of it. Same reason a lot of people get out of journalism, frankly, because it wasn't a good way to raise a family.
Yeah, it's difficult.
But it's a lifelong passion. It's like cars. It's things that take you places emotionally while taking you places physically. But.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go on the ultimate drive before I let you go today. I'm going to park anything you want in your driveway. So for a guy who's driven so many cars, this might be easy, might not be easy, but I'm going to park it in your driveway. You can take it anywhere. And here's the key, back to people. You could take anybody with you, including somebody from the past who's no longer with
interesting.
us. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Open some doors. So where are we going? What are we doing in this or what vehicle are we doing it in, and who are we with?
Okay, so you want where, who, and what, right?
Yeah.
So let's think about this. So I'd go with my dead grandparents, all 4 of them.
Oh, wow.
Something large enough to hold them, so it'd have to be, and yet also kind of stylish, so it would have to be, so the 5 of us, let's say like some kind of, maybe like a mid-60s Lincoln or an early Continental, early 60s.
Okay.
They'd probably, I've been told I knew all of them, but only as a kid. And I've been told they were all terrible drivers. So
you'll be driving.
I'll probably be driving, but maybe let them drive once in a while, just, because everybody should have moments of terror in their lives. And what would we talk about? I think mainly just how my parents turned into the people they became. And it's one of those things I remember talking to them about that when I was little, talking to my parents about how they became who they are when I was little. And yet, you think about this stuff differently as you get older.
Right.
You're a parent. I'm a parent. We have kids, and it's just one of those things that the older you get, the more it seems like alchemy. You just want to know where I came from, how it works.
Yeah, it's one of the things I've always said is most of us don't know much about our parents unless they've shared it before we were born. We just know them as our parents. But what kind of lives do they have? What struggles do they have? And sometimes when you spend the time to ask great questions, you learn some things that you go, oh, now I know why you're like that.
Thanks, Mom.
Yeah, I had no idea. Wow. And the struggles too. And especially grandparents because of the times they lived in. My grandparents grew up on a farm or had a farm in Texas during the Dust Bowl. And my great-grandfather founded that land during the Great Land Rush. Came across in a wagon and put a flag in the ground. And what he didn't know was he was supposed to be putting a flag on the ground in Oklahoma in the Panhandle where they tripped off all the Native Americans, but he got too far south. He ended up in Texas. But they said, okay, fine, you can have it. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just crazy stuff. Yeah. I mean, you think of how easy life is now compared to that kind of stuff. Yeah. Wow. That really forms people. You've taken us on a fun ride today, Sam, and I really appreciate it. I think it's really cool what you guys are doing. Could you leave us with some parting words of wisdom or advice since we're into the new year?
Oh man, I don't have any advice. I don't know anything. I'll go back to that Denise quote about change being the only constant, and let's wrap that up with I think sometimes the hardest thing in life is just to be positive in the face of things that are not. And if there's one thing you can try to do that and help others do it.
You hit the nail on the head there, Sam. That's the secret sauce I've learned having interviewed so many people is that what is truly makes human beings happy is when you're helping somebody else. Yeah. Unfortunately, some people don't figure that out ever. Some figure it out later in life and some figure it out very early in life. So that is the secret sauce to life, listeners. And you've heard it from me over and over again. If you're unhappy about your life, go help somebody and that'll change your perspective really, really quick. How can people learn more about the podcast?
Yeah, let's start with that. So It's Not the Car is available anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple and Spotify being the big ones, but it's also on YouTube. YouTube, we tend to have, as Mark said, historical videos and insights and insets. If you check it out, I'd love to know what you thought. Feel free to DM or comment, or there's an email list, email in the description. Please let us know. And especially if you're not into racing, because if you're not into racing, it's built specifically for you. So really appreciate that. As far as everything else, I tend to appear in Car and Driver, Road and Track occasionally, all over the map. I write for a handful of other magazines. I do a regular column on the British website, The Intercooler. And you can find me on social media at That's Sam Smith on pretty much anywhere social media is sold.
There you go. Yeah, absolutely. I'll put all these links on Sam's show notes page if you're driving, walking, riding a skateboard, flying, whatever you're doing today while you're listening to this podcast. Thanks for listening. And a big shout out to Ross and to your cohort in crime there, Jeff, because they are the guys that brought us together today. If you missed my talks with them, you'll find it in the archives on the Cars Yeah website, along with 2,465 other shows there for you to enjoy. That should get you across the country or to the moon. Just back-to-back shows. There you go. Sam, thanks for taking a pit stop. One last pun for you today, bud. Taking a pit stop with me today and sharing what you're doing. I think it's fantastic. Wish you guys the best of luck. Until you and I talk again, I'll see you down the road.
Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome. 20, 50, or 100 years from now, will there be a workforce to care for the collector vehicles we love? With auto shop programs disappearing across the country, it's a question we enthusiasts have to ask. That's why I support the RPM Foundation, which exists to ensure that the critical skills necessary to preserve and restore these vehicles aren't lost to time. One of the many ways RPM, which is short for Restoration, Preservation, and Mentorship, is accomplishing this goal is through workforce development initiatives. The RPM Apprenticeship Program enables the next generation of artisans to earn a living while they learn the craft of restoring and preserving these vehicles directly from industry professionals. The Endangered Skills Program documents the process of masters training future craftspeople on a variety of critical skills in danger of being lost forever. For more information on how the RPM Foundation is driving the future of the collector vehicle skills trade, visit RPM Foundation today. They're one of the charities of choice here on Cars Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's ride here at Cars Yeah. Drive on over to carsyeah.com to find show notes and inspiring automotive fun. Download your free copy of Filler Up, a fun book filled with gorgeous photographs of fuel filler fun, including quotes from more inspiring automotive enthusiasts. Download your copy today, and we'll see you next time on Cars Yeah.